Are you struggling to get things done in your business? Is your team not showing initiative to get things done? Have you ever thought, why isn't everybody just using their brain? I am Melissa Franks, your host, and this is the Opt-in Podcast, where we talk about challenges in small businesses and how to go from surviving to thriving in business. And today we are talking about the top 5 reasons that businesses fail to execute. And if you are a small business owner, if you work in a small business, heck, if you work in a corporation, these challenges are present. Whether you are making 6 figures a year or $1 billion, you will come up against these exact same issues over and over again. Why? Because they are as common as humans needing to breathe and drink water to survive. So today, specifically, I'm going to break down the top 5, and we're going to discuss exactly what the issue is and the impact on the organization and what you can do so that you stop experiencing the issue. Now, I will go on record and say that not all businesses experience these challenges, and they definitely don't all at the same time. So when we walk through these pain points, you may say, that one hit a little close to home, and others may not be things that you have experienced yet or have already solved, and that is okay. This podcast is a resource for you to come back to when you see that there are challenges with execution in your business, in your team, heck, even in your personal life, and run through them and figure out what's going on and how to fix it. So that's what we're going to do today. The very, very first one, and this is common everywhere. And the very first reason that businesses fail to execute is because there is a lack of clarity. And in small businesses, that's because the leader is most often either a visionary or a creative. And visionaries and creatives do not live in the details. Visionaries and creatives dream big and look out sometimes years in advance and aren't so worried about what's happening today or tomorrow or the next day. And this is where things can get really challenging because the people that work for you, the individual contributors, if you will, need specificity. While the big picture, the great idea, the creative genius is inspiring, it is difficult to bring into crystal clear focus so that somebody can start taking action and bring it to life. And so what your responsibility as the leader is to take those incredibly vague and intangible concepts and make them crystal clear. And the way that you know that your team lacks clarity around what they are supposed to be doing is because you will see that they're confused. You will see that they're doing work and it's not moving the needle. You'll see that they're not doing anything at all because they didn't understand what you were saying. In addition, when things lack clarity, they lack timelines. They lack ownership. They lack budget. They lack an end-to-end plan to get things done. An idea is always a great idea until you start putting it into place. And then things can happen, unexpected things that need to be addressed. So if your team is failing to execute and the root cause is because there isn't clarity, it's really, really simple to fix this. And this is my best advice to visionary leaders. You work with the team to identify what is the next right thing to do. If we have this big, audacious goal, what's the next right thing to start moving in that direction? And this isn't goal attainment. This may be developing a plan. This may be getting educated. This could be a variety of things. The very first question that you ask is, what should we do next? And then once you have that answer, once there's specificity around the next immediate action, then you say, and then what? And then what? And then what? And the goal for this exercise is that you have a roadmap full of mile markers, if you will, or milestones. You don't know how you're going to achieve the vision or the goal or bring the creative idea to life just yet. You do know what the big milestones are along the way and how you're going to break up the work. And then the last thing is you assign ownership and put some timelines around the finite thing that's the next thing you can do. When you follow this methodology for each of your big ideas, each of the vague concepts, it becomes a part of the business's DNA. You, as the visionary, as the big idea generator, can continue to live in the land of big in ideation. And all this asks of you is to help direct the team so that they can begin to take action. And then the last thing, which we'll get to as another one of these challenges, is you will need to hold them accountable. So the very first roadblock to execution is lack of clarity. Now, the second one is poor prioritization. And again, businesses big and small, new and old, teams of hundreds and teams of two, this can halt them in their tracks. This can be a showstopper in the business. Poor prioritization is ultimately driven by the leader not providing clarity around what was most important. You see, it's always the leader's job to set the tone and expectations. And if you as the leader are clear around what the goals and objectives and results are, then the team has a foundational basis for which they can prioritize. When there is poor prioritization, it can look like activities and tasks are constantly getting shifted. Have you ever seen a lazy Susan? Maybe you've been to like a big Chinese restaurant at a big round table, and in the middle of it is this massive lazy Susan. And the reason for that is the table's too big for any one person to reach to get what they need. Well, when there is poor prioritization, all of the activities and desired results are sitting in the middle of that table on the lazy Susan. Now, if you've ever been in an environment where you've needed to put things on and take things off the lazy Susan, do you know what can happen? Is as you're going to grab one thing, somebody across the table wants something they can't quite reach and they move it. And then you know what happens? You have something new in front of you. You weren't able to complete whatever action you were planning to, putting something on or taking it off. And instead, you now have something in front of you that you didn't expect, and you need to determine what to do. And that's what poor prioritization looks like. Poor prioritization is when your team is constantly getting things served in front of them, and they have to decide what to do next. And if you are one of those leaders that is really energetic, and as soon as you think about it, you wanted to sow, you create a lot of confusion for your team. You have a lot of work that is started and not finished. You have a lot of loose ends that aren't tied up. People physically lose things. You have an attempt to buy office supplies that never quite gets completed. You have travel plans that forget to include a car. You start to see everything break down because the priorities are constantly shifting. And I would go so far as to say it's not even priorities, it's where you're asking the team to focus. The big overall impact, as I mentioned, is in this case, nothing ever gets finished. You have a completely incomplete set of tasks and activities, and the danger of nothing getting finished is an inconsistent experience for whomever your clients or customers are. It means that the way that they interact with your business and your employees and your products and services is never quite the same. And that over time will degrade your business results and can put you at risk for long-term sustainable viability. And you absolutely can't grow in an environment like that. So what do? You get incredibly clear about what the priorities are. Now, with most businesses, because small business moves so rapidly, corporations, totally different story. Small businesses, however, the landscape constantly changes. It's like you're standing on the beach and the ocean is coming in and out, and every time it goes back out, the sand looks different. That's what a small business is. And therefore, I strongly encourage big, intangible, like very vague goals to be set for the year. And then every 12 weeks, also known as every quarter, you set specific priorities and goals. Now, of course, they're all aligned. You can pull the string between the big and the quarter. And as you progress through the year, you can also see how it goes from quarter one to building upon it in quarter two and so forth. However, when you are setting priorities, you are setting finite, specific, time-bound priorities. And in your case, in your business, in the team that you work in, or for the very specific discipline and scope of work that is your responsibility, understand what you want to achieve in the next 12 weeks, set the priorities, make sure everybody is aligned and headed in the same direction, and execute. That is the fastest, most succinct, and productive way to set priorities. The third reason that businesses fail to execute is because they have weak or missing systems. Weak or missing systems. I know. We had to get to number 3, and you're listening to somebody that's an operator by trade, and you're like, here she goes. Standard operating procedures. I hate standard operating procedures. I hate writing stuff down. So boring, blah, blah, blah. I have heard it all. And you know what? I don't particularly enjoy defining standard operating procedures. I multiple times, in fact, attempted to become certified in the process certifications and dropped out real early. I can vividly remember, I love this story so much, and he doesn't listen to this, so he's not going to, but I can vividly remember I was in my first technology at Gap Inc. and we were creating standard operating procedures to distribute to the stores that we were working with. And I had never learned how to use Visio or create a process map. I had knew enough to be dangerous, and I was tasked with doing this. And one day, one of my colleagues, John, came out of the lab where we tested things, and he was super frustrated. He was tired of being in there. He liked being around people and being in the lab. We were usually in there by ourselves, and it was cold, and there were no windows, and it was not the most fun. And he came out very frustrated and had another 4 hours of that work to do. And I was about ready to throw my computer because of these process maps. And so he asked me how things are going, and we were commiserating. And I turned to him and said, hey, what if we just switched? And sure enough, that's what we did. And I lived my very best life in the lab. And John lived his very best life in his cubicle with his people building the process maps. So I share that to say, I get it. It's not sexy, it's not fun, and it's wholly necessary. And that is because when you don't have systems or processes, or they're very weak, you're relying on individual talent. We don't need to write it down because Susie is amazing at it. You want to know how that works? Ask Sally. It all works fine until Susie or Sally go on vacation or quit their job. And then you may have a day or a week to get things written down, or maybe no time at all. And all of a sudden, you're left with a huge gap and nobody knows what to do. That's the best of circumstances when you have individuals that are running these things. Often, however, what you have is people just winging it. They never do the same thing the same way twice. They never do it in the same amount of time. They never do it with the same amount of quality, and they will skip steps. This creates inconsistency. This creates frustration within the broader team, because the one thing about systems and processes is that when it's done to completion, there is output. There is something that happens and somebody is waiting for it. Sometimes it's that there is an internal dependency and you kick off another internal system or process. Sometimes there's a client at the end of that. No matter what, whenever there is a system or a process, there's an outcome. And when you're winging it, when you're not doing it the same ever, when you're not consistently delivering the outcome at a specific time or place, then you're frustrating the consumer. You are being incredibly inconsistent with your customers, and you're error prone. When there aren't systems and processes and checks and balances, or they're very weak, quality control is impossible. It's impossible. Not only that, consistency does not exist. And the one thing that I know about growth is it requires consistency. When we talk about planning, anytime we talk about it, the very first rule is do it again. That's the very first rule. The last thing that you ever want to do in business is take a step backwards. So the very first thing that you want to do is to replicate and repeat what you had done before. Had a 7-figure year in 2024? Do it again. Operated with an expense ratio of 25%? Do it again. The entire goal of business is to do it again and you cannot do the and until you do the rest of it. And the only way that you can do it again is if you know what you did and you can repeat it. And the only way that you can repeat it is if you have systems and processes. The secret to sustainable, long-term growth is consistency, quality, predictability. And if you have weak or missing systems, you're not going to achieve any of the goals that you have set. Number 4 might offend a few of you. Oh, I'm going to warn you now. Number 4 is an inability to delegate or trust the people who work for you. Okay, small business owners, at some point or another, you have existed in this season. You may be in the season right now. Did I strike a nerve? Do you feel a little vulnerable? Probably because this is something that you're challenged with. The challenge with starting a business is that it's just you. You have to do everything or nothing gets done. And then you get incredibly excited because your business is at a place where you can hire people to take off some of that weight. And then what you realize is that they don't do it like you did it. Now, some of us have awareness and know that's the whole point. Because if you hired the right person with the right skills, then they do it better than you. Many of us, however, are emotionally tied to everything in our business because it's our business. And what ends up happening is you micromanage and you are distracted from the work you should be doing or the life you should be living because you're concerned. And your concern comes forward in the shape of micromanagement. And here is the kicker. This is the fastest disease to kill a working relationship. Employees, contractors of all generations abhor being micromanaged. And small businesses are interesting because often there is increased latitude and authority levels, much larger and broader than you would ever see in a bigger business. And so when micromanagement happens, people feel vulnerable. And in the best of cases, not delegating can slow down operations. In the worst of cases, it creates bottlenecks because if you have to answer every question, if you have to read every email, if you have to touch everything, you're the reason things aren't getting done. And in the very extreme and worst cases, you demotivate your staff. And staff that's not motivated is staff that's not productive. Staff that's not motivated is staff that leaves. Staff that is not motivated is staff that's not loyal. So what do? You delegate. And I know, easier said than done. So this is how you delegate. You are specific about the task or activity or project that they are to complete. You are specific about timeline. You are specific about quality. And you are specific about how their performance is going to be measured. When you provide all of that specificity, then they have clarity. Hello. Pain point number 1 we talked about. And you can trust that there is a way to verify if they are doing what is expected of them. When you do not establish that framework, you will forever be concerned that they are not doing what you want them to do. You can have both. An empowered workforce that is accountable. It's not two separate things. And then the very last one that rolls right into this topic of conversation is a lack of accountability. That is the 5th reason that businesses fail to execute. And this looks like you discuss an idea or an outcome or a project and nothing ever comes of it. This looks like finger pointing. This looks like the hot potato game with responsibilities. When you have a lack of accountability, there is poor follow through. And what you will find is that people tend to spend most of their time doing the things that they enjoy doing. And they just ignore the things that are necessary that they don't want to do. It's human nature. You're looking for the easy way. Our brains are constantly seeking out how to avoid pain. We're wired that way. And in some cases, while we may love our job, some of it is always painful. Think about it. What's the one thing that you know is necessary that you absolutely don't want to do? For a lot of business owners, it's having difficult conversations. In fact, there was somebody that I worked with once upon a time, and he had some very big, lofty goals, which could be reasonably achieved with effort. And the one thing that was immediately getting in the way was this pain point, lack of accountability. And the reason that there was lack of accountability is because there was an unwillingness on his part to have difficult conversations. In fact, his goal was to hire somebody to do that for him. It's how little he wanted to do that. And the problem was that as much as a manager or a third party could support that, at the end of the day, accountability only occurs when you provide feedback. It only occurs when you check. It only occurs when you have difficult conversations. Now, I'm a half full glass kind of girl, right? And I believe in the best interest of everybody, always. I don't believe anybody comes to work to do a bad job. I don't believe anybody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be mean to everybody today. I just don't believe that is how we're wired. With that said, bad habits, personality traits, internal team conflict, lack of clarity, all of it can lead to a lack of productivity. So in order to resolve a lack of accountability, you do exactly what we've discussed with some of these others. Be clear, be specific, and follow up. Ensure that when a commitment is made, it is achieved. And if it's not, create an environment where they are accountable, where they stand up and communicate that a deadline was missed or results were not achieved or that they failed. And you can create an environment of accountability without it being an environment of fear. And that is the delicate balance. If you can solve whichever one of these pain points, one or more, that are currently happening in your business, you clear the road for growth. Things become so much easier because you're not worried about these things. And in the end, these are the leader's responsibility. Employees of small businesses, employees of big businesses can ask for these things. They can point out that there's a struggle or a gap. Leadership addresses it. And that's where you, the small business owner, the manager, the director, the executive, the leader are required. So I hope that this was helpful. And if it was, I would please ask you to share with anybody that is failing to execute in their business, struggling with deliverables, or their team. Until we meet again, friends, please know that you are wise and you are strong and you are capable, and I believe in you.